You survived the Miami weekend, nailed the speech, and maxed out your credit card in the name of friendship. Now you've got one hangover, 4 pastel dresses, and 0 reasons to wear them again. Sell them on Depop. Just snap a few photos, and we'll take care of the rest. And you at least get some of your dignity, money back. Someone on Depop wants what you've got. Start selling now. Depop, where taste recognizes taste.
Where is Daredevil?
I'm right here. Don't miss the return of Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again.
So what's next?
I feel liberated.
We're gonna take this city back.
Over medicated.
In an all-new season, now streaming only on Disney+.
They're hunting us. It's time we started hunting them.
I can work with that.
This should be tons of fun.
Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again, now streaming only on Disney+.
Step into the intriguing world of The Black Box, a captivating true crime podcast hosted by Kay. Where the shadows of the past reveal the most bizarre and unorthodox crimes committed within the Black community. Each episode delves deep into a unique case, exploring both solved and unsolved mysteries that challenge the norms of conventional crime narratives. From peculiar heists to enigmatic disappearances, The Black Box unravels stories that highlight the complexities and nuances of urban life. With expert interviews, community insights, and a keen exploration of the human psyche, listeners will find themselves drawn into a world where every episode poses the question, what lies behind the black box of urban crime?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to The Black Box, where forgotten voices find light. A podcast created to bring a lot of details in a smaller amount of time. I'm your host, Kay, and together we will venture into the shadows of urban true crime mysteries, unearthing stories of unsolved cases that have tragically faded from public memory within the African American community. Today, we discuss a case that has plagued this country for many years, twisting and turning with its conspiracies, secrets, and lies. One thing is certain throughout this ordeal is that a young boy is dead. But do we really know why and how? This is the story of Kendrick Johnson. The Black Box is now open. When you drive into Valdosta, Georgia, you're greeted by the hallmarks of a classic Southern town: azaleas, sprawling oaks, and a deep-seated obsession with Friday night lights. After all, this is Wintersville, USA. But in January 2013, the spotlight shifted from the football field to the old gymnasium of Lowndes High School. Before the headlines, before the protests, and before the tragedy that shook Valdosta, Georgia, there was a young man with a smile that could light up a room. Kendrick Lamar Johnson entered this world on October 10, 1995. He was born in Valdosta, Georgia, a town known for its deep roots in high school football and Southern hospitality. He was the son of Kenneth and Jacqueline Johnson. To his parents, he wasn't just a headline, he was their KJ. Kendrick grew up in a full, busy, and loving household. He was one of several siblings, including his sisters Kenyatta and Portia, and his brother Kenneth Jr. Family wasn't just a background for Kendrick, it was his backbone. His parents often described him as a quiet leader in the house, the kind of kid who didn't need to make a lot of noise to be noticed. When you look into Kendrick's childhood, a very specific picture emerges. He wasn't a troublemaker. He was a sweet, somewhat shy kid who was incredibly close to his mother. Friends and family highlight his childhood highlights as being centered around two things: sports and his community. Kendrick was a natural in sports. By the time he reached high school, he was a three-sport athlete. He played football, track, and his real passion, basketball. Like many young men in Valdosta, Kendrick had eyes on the future. He didn't just play for fun, he had dreams of one day going pro. He was known for being remarkably laid back. Teachers and coaches at Lowndes High School, where he was a sophomore, described him as polite and well-mannered. He was the kind of student who did his work and stayed out of the way. Kendrick was a proud Lowndes High School Viking. In a town where the Wintersville Classic is practically a holiday, being an athlete at Lowndes meant something. But school wasn't just about the jersey for KJ. He was a 17-year-old trying to navigate the typical life of a sophomore. He had a tight-knit circle of friends, and they shared those small, everyday traditions that seemed so minor until they're gone. For example, Kendrick and his friends famously shared a pair of Adidas shoes for gym class. To save on the cost of a locker, they had a system of storing their sneakers inside the rolled-up wrestling mats in the old gym. It was a normal teenage solution to a normal teenage problem, which speaks to the Kendrick people knew: resourceful, focused on his game, and just trying to get through the school day so he could get back to the things he loved. On the morning of January 10th, 2013, Kendrick went to school just like any other day. He was marked present for his first 3 blocks. He was a kid with a schedule, a routine, and a family waiting for him to come home for dinner. When we talk about Kendrick Johnson, we have to remember that 17-year-old boy who loved his mom's cooking, who joked with his siblings, and who was just beginning to figure out who he wanted to be in this world. He was more than a mystery. He was a son. He was a brother. He was a Viking. So, how did he go from being a Viking to dead? Let's start with the official version, the one the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation stand by. Imagine a gym filled with wrestling mats. These mats are heavy, 6 feet tall, rolled up and standing on end. According to investigators, Kendrick and several other students used these upright mats as a makeshift locker to store their gym shoes. They dropped their shoes down the center of the roll to keep them safe and out of sight. Now, the official theory is that on January 10th, 2013, Kendrick was looking for a specific pair of Adidas sneakers that he shared with his friends. Investigators believe he stood on a bench, leaned over the top of the mat, and reached down. They hypothesize is that he fell in head first, became wedged in the center of the mat, and was unable to pull himself out. The GBI conducted the initial autopsy. Their conclusion: positional asphyxia. Now, positional asphyxia means that because Kendrick was trapped upside down in a confined space, his body could no longer move blood and oxygen effectively. His own weight and the position of his body eventually caused him to suffocate. The GBI's report was clear: no signs of a struggle, no drugs in his system, and no significant external trauma, other than some minor abrasions on his knuckles. To the state, this was an accidental death, case closed. But was it really? For the Johnson family, that explanation didn't just feel wrong, it felt impossible. Kendrick Johnson was buried in January 2013 at Sunset Hill Cemetery in Valdosta. But Kenneth and Jacqueline Johnson never accepted the accidental theory. They pointed to the crime scene photos that showed Kendrick's face was severely bloated, with blood pooled in his head. They asked how a 17-year-old athlete, strong and agile, couldn't have pushed his way out of a mat that wasn't even taped shut. In June 2013, the family did something no parent should ever have to do. They won a court order to exhume their son's body for a private autopsy. From there, they hired Dr. William Anderson, a private pathologist. When Dr. Anderson began his examination, he found something the GBI had seemingly missed, or at least hadn't highlighted. He identified blunt force trauma to the right side of Kendrick's neck and jaw. He concluded that Kendrick had been struck with a non-accidental blow that was consistent with an inflicted injury. Dr. Anderson's conclusion changed everything. He ruled the cause of death as blunt force trauma and not suffocation. Suddenly, the freak accident looks like a homicide. But as Dr. Anderson was performing this second autopsy, he made a discovery that would turn a tragedy into an outright nightmare. When Dr. Anderson opened Kendrick's body cavity, he expected to find the internal organs. In a standard autopsy, organs are removed, they're examined, and then returned to the body before the burial. But Kendrick's organs, specifically his heart, his brain, and his lungs, were gone. And to add insult to injury, Kendrick's body had been stuffed from his pelvis to his skull with crumpled up newspaper. The shock of this simply can't be overstated. The family's attorney at the time described it as a ghoulish discovery. And this is where the questions start to come into play. How does a teenager go into the ground without his heart? The Harrington Funeral Home, which handled Kendrick's burial, claimed that they received the body from the GBI without the organs. They stated that the organs had been destroyed during the first autopsy due to decomposition. They defended the use of newspaper as a standard, though perhaps old-school practice, to maintain the body's shape for the casket when organs are missing. However, the GBI fired back, negating those claims, stating that their policy is to always return the organs to the body. This kind of created a he said, she said over the remains of the body, over the remains of a child. For the Johnsons, the missing organs weren't just a sign of disrespect, they were a sign of a cover-up. Without those organs, they couldn't run independent toxicology or check for internal bruising that could make the difference in the case. As I mentioned before, Kendrick's internal organs were gone. But let's talk about the implications of that. In the true crime world, we look at evidence. Organs are evidence. They hold toxicology data, signs of internal hemorrhaging, and physical clues that can't be seen from the outside. When that body was stuffed with newspaper, it wasn't just a failure of funeral home ethics. To the Johnsons, it was a literal gutting of the evidence. It's a detail that fueled one of the biggest conspiracy theories in modern Georgia history, that someone, somewhere, wanted to make sure a second autopsy would be inconclusive. Despite this, Dr. Anderson was still able to identify hemorrhaging in the neck and soft tissues. He saw enough to say this was not an accident. And that single conclusion is what launched a decade of war between a family and the state of Georgia. Since 2013, the legal filings in this case have been a dizzying merry-go-round. There have been lawsuits against the school, the sheriff's office, the GBI, and of course the funeral home. But let's look at the most recent developments. Just a few weeks ago, in March of 2026, a federal judge dismissed a $1 billion lawsuit filed by the Johnsons. The judge cited procedural defects and sovereign immunity, basically saying you can't sue the state for certain things in this way. Did the Johnsons back down? Not for a second. Within 24 hours of that dismissal, Kenneth and Jacqueline Johnson filed a new, sweeping $10 billion complaint. But this time, they didn't just name the police. They named the federal judges themselves, Chief Judge Lee Martin May and Judge Sarah Elizabeth Garrity, as defendants. The family is alleging that these judges participated in a RICO-style racketeering organization to cover up their son's premeditated murder. They claim their 5th, 7th, and 14th Amendment rights were violated by court orders they describe as materially false and fraudulent. When you sue the judges who are supposed to judge your case, you're telling the world that you believe the entire system is rigged. When a family sues the very court system that is supposed to provide them justice, you know the bridge of trust has been completely burned. So let's address the elephant in the room, the conspiracy. The internet is a breeding ground for theories, but the Johnsons' claims have always centered on two specific individuals, the sons of a former FBI agent who attended Lowndes High. The family points to several things. One, the surveillance footage. They claim hours of footage are missing from the gym on the day Kendrick died. There's also the stomp marks. In 2025, the family released new photos they claim show tread marks from a shoe on Kendrick's abdomen, marks they say were ignored by the GBI. Third was the $500,000 reward. Lowndes County Sheriff Ashley Polk, who reopened the case in 2021 only to close it again in 2022, has maintained that there's no evidence of foul play. However, as of April of 2026, a $500,000 reward remains on the table for information leading to an arrest and conviction. Think about it. The sheriff says it's an accident, yet there's a $500,000 bounty for a murderer. This creates a psychological tug of war for the public. If it's an accident, why the reward? If it's a murder, why no charges? To understand why Kendrick Johnson's death sparked a national outcry, you have to understand the ground it happened on. Lowndes High isn't just a school, it's a massive institution with nearly 3,000 students. But for the Johnson family, that institution represented a power structure that they believed was never built for them. In this episode, we're looking at the background of Lowndes High, the racial demographics of Valdosta, and the historical friction that led Kendrick's parents to believe that race wasn't just a factor in his death, but the reason for the alleged cover-up. Okay, let's look at the numbers. Lowndes County and the city of Valdosta have a complex demographic split. As of the early 2010s, the city of Valdosta was majority Black, which was roughly about 51 to 53%, while the surrounding Lowndes County remained majority white. However, Lowndes High School served as a melting pot of sorts that often felt like a pressure cooker. While the student body was roughly 35 to 40% Black, the administrative and systemic power, the school board, the local sheriff's office, and the judicial circuit, remained predominantly white. The Johnsons' suspicion of racism didn't appear in a vacuum. It was rooted in a perception of the old guard, which was a network of established white families who held the keys to the city's legal and educational systems. When Kendrick was found dead, his parents immediately felt a wall go up. They saw it. They pointed to a specific disparity. When white students in the region faced trouble, the system seemed to offer grace. When Kendrick was found in a mat, the system offered a closed case in less than 24 hours. To the Johnsons, the speed of the accidental death, it felt like a rush to sweep a Black boy's life under the rug to protect the school's reputation. One of the most haunting things about this case is how the facts seem to change depending on who is holding the magnifying glass. Since Kendrick's death, several official details have been challenged by new documentation. In 2022, a sheriff's office diagram suggested the opening in the wrestling mat was only 14 inches wide. However, Kendrick's shoulder width was measured at 19 inches. This discrepancy had become a cornerstone of the family's argument. How does a boy with 19-inch shoulders accidentally slip into a 14-inch hole? Now, there's another detail to note. Just this year, the family released recently discovered crime scene photos that they claim show a deformity in Kendrick's head consistent with a skull fracture, something they say was never properly addressed in the original GBI report. New filings highlight an FBI case where an investigator allegedly told a coroner that an autopsy was not needed because the death was an accident before a full investigation had ever even been conducted. These aren't just theories anymore. They're documented inconsistencies that have forced even skeptical observers to take a second look. If you go on TikTok, X, or, Twitter or whatever, or Instagram today, the hashtag Kendrick Johnson tag is more active than ever. Social media has become the unofficial investigator for this case. Creators are using AI to enhance the grainy 2013 surveillance footage, pointing out what they claim are shadows of other people in the gym. Recently, a controversial trend emerged where users tried to demonstrate how difficult it is to get stuck in a rolled up mat. While some see this as insensitive, it has kept Kendrick's name in the algorithms for a new generation. Much of the current discourse stems from a 2025 Georgia appeals court ruling that breathed new life into the family's civil rights lawsuit. Users are sharing snippets of that ruling as proof that the case was mishandled. The narrative on social media is almost 100% in favor of the family. The public has largely rejected the whole positional asphyxia, viewing it as a physical impossibility. Now, the question I find myself asking the most, has anyone been arrested? As of April 22nd, 2026, there have been 0 arrests pertaining to the death of Kendrick Johnson. No classmates, no officials, no one. While the $500,000 reward suggests the sheriff's office is looking for a killer, they have not publicly named a suspect since the case was reopened and then closed again in 2022. The brothers who were the focus of the family's original suspicions have never been charged and have consistently denied any involvement, with authorities citing surveillance footage as their alibi. The Johnsons believe the lack of arrests is the direct result of the RICO cover-up that they describe in their $10 billion suit. They argue that the evidence for an arrest exists, but the political will to execute it does not. Why did the Johnsons believe racism was at play? It came down to how the suspects were treated versus how Kendrick was remembered. The two primary persons of interest identified by the family were Brian and Brandon Bell, sons of an FBI agent. In the eyes of the Johnsons, the Bell brothers represented the protected class of Lowndes High, white, athletic, and connected to federal law enforcement. The racial disparity here was visceral. The Johnsons argued that if a white student had been found dead in a mat and the primary suspects were two black brothers with a father in the FBI, the school would have been treated like a crime scene for months. Instead, they claimed that 1, the scene was contaminated as students were allowed back into the gym shortly after the body was removed. 2, the school provided surveillance footage that was missing hours of tape. The Johnsons viewed this not as a technical glitch, but as a deliberate eraser of a black life by a white-led administration. And you cannot discuss the racial tension at Lowndes High School without discussing the history of South Georgia. This is a region where the memory of Jim Crow isn't a distant chapter in a textbook. It's lived history for the grandparents of these students. Valdosta has a history of racial violence, including the infamous 1918 lynching of Mary Turner. For the Black community in Lowndes County, there's a generational skepticism towards local police. When the sheriff's office, an office that was almost entirely white at the leadership level in 2013, when they told the Johnsons to just move on, it didn't sound like professional advice. It sounded like an ultimatum from the past. The Johnsons believed that the Valdosta way was to protect the image of the town's athletic programs and the careers of influential white men like Rick Bell at all costs. This belief was bolstered when the local media and some segments of the white community pushed back harshly against the Johnsons, accusing them of playing the race card and extorting the town. This polarization turned Lowndes High into a microcosm of the American racial divide. So how is the family handling this today? I've seen Kenneth and Jacqueline in the news for years. They're tired, but they're not broken. Every year on the anniversary of Kendrick's death, they're back at the school or the courthouse. They've spent over 900 days in active legal proceedings. For them, this isn't just about a payout. They've stated repeatedly that they want the death certificate changed. They want the word accident erased and replaced with homicide. To them, that piece of paper is a final insult to their son's memory. As a mother, and as someone who spends my life looking at the dark corners of the justice system, I see a family that is stuck in a loop of grief because they feel the truth has been buried deeper than their son. Kendrick Johnson's case is a wound that Valdosta and the nation can't seem to heal. With $10 billion on the line and a family that refuses to be silenced by procedural defects, the next few months will be some of the most critical in the case's history. Whether or not Kendrick Johnson's death was an accident or a murder remains a point of fierce legal debate. But the perception of the death is undeniably tied to the racial geography of Valdosta. The Johnsons didn't just lose a son. They felt they lost the right to a fair investigation because of the color of their skin and the status of those they accused. They saw a high school that celebrated Black athletes on Friday night, but in their eyes, failed to protect a Black student on a Friday morning. As of today, the lawsuits continue and the tension at Lowndes High remains a quiet hum under the surface of every football game. The case of the boy in the mat is a reminder that in the South, the facts of a case are often filtered through the long, jagged lens of history. As with the infamous ones, you can leave a review on any streaming app you're able to listen to the episode on. You can also learn more about the podcast by joining the Facebook group, The Infamous Ones Discussion Group. Be sure to keep an eye out for clues for the Infamous Ones virtual murder mystery for a chance to win and be a guest on the virtual show May 24th. Also, leave a review on any streaming app available, but I would love for you to leave a review on Apple. Ladies and gentlemen, the black box is now closed and locked tight. I bid you farewell. Until the next time, the next situation, and the next mystery we unravel together. Stay curious.